Welcome to another edition of Straight Talk Thursday. This symposium is brought to you by Core Civic Foundation and Men of Valor. The topic this week, a powerful topic, outside the box thinking when it comes to the criminal justice reform. My name is Rudy Kalis. I'm a volunteer for Men of Valor and have been for the last 3 years since retiring after a long career as a broadcaster here in Nashville. We have assembled a panel of experts who believe that radical change can and should be productive, save taxpayers money, and drastically cut the recidivism rate. In other words, men and women returning to prison when they have failed on the outside. They are outspoken. With that in mind, I must tell you that any comments made throughout the Straight Talk Thursday program is the personal observation and opinion of our speakers and panelists. They do not represent the views of Men of Valor or Core Civic Foundation, nor do we endorse any specific legislation. We are, however, grateful for their participation. So with that in mind, let me introduce the panel that is joining us this afternoon. It's going to be a real pleasure chatting with them. First, Julie Warren is the Director of State Initiatives for Right on Crime. She started her legal career as at the U.S. Department of Justice. And before becoming the Director of Right on Crime, she served as an Assistant Attorney General in the West Virginia Criminal Appellate Division and Solicitor General's Office. Julie, thank you for spending time with us today. All right, away from Julie. Next is Gail Petty, has been a highly successful entrepreneur, successful and passionate social activist as well, advocating for smoke-free Tennessee and also the program Begin Anew, where she has mentored, I should say, women to rise out of poverty. And on the criminal justice front, she has been outspoken on what she calls a broken bail system that is costing taxpayers dearly. So thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Then we enjoy your presence as well. Justin Owen, he is the president and CEO of the Beacon Center, which has received a number of national awards for their sophistication and unique approach. Under his leadership, Beacon has helped repeal Tennessee's Hall income tax and death tax, saving taxpayers nearly $2 billion. Another one of the programs that the Beacon Center has been deeply involved in is the criminal justice reform. So thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Rudy. Appreciate you having me.
Well, we're so glad to have you. And Tori Venable has a passion for politics and serving people. She is the state director of Americans for Prosperity, which has some 46,000 state-based volunteers, if I have read it correctly. She is a tireless fixture at the state legislature, battling for issues such as voter rights, tax reform, and criminal justice reform. Tori, thanks for being with us.
Rudy, thanks so much for having me.
Well, look, let's start it out because, as they say in news business, I suppose, we have breaking news. The governor has signed some important bills. Julie, if you could, give us an idea of what that is and what it means.
Well, haven't gotten to the signature stage yet, but the Tennessee House nearly unanimously, with just one no vote, passed two very important pieces of criminal justice reform that are actually a part of the governor's package. The first bill will expand opportunities to invest in alternative sentencing programs. One of the things that I think is really key to that piece of legislation is currently in Tennessee, you can be on probation, which we call being on paper for a long period, indefinite period of time. There's no cap. What the governor is proposing is to have these individuals capped at either 8 years or 10 years if it's a multiple charge situation. So it really does allow our corrections officers who do the supervising to not be bogged down with these massive caseloads that really impacts their ability to effectively supervise folks who really need more hands-on supervision. Another thing that the bill will do is it really puts a little bit more teeth behind what we call graduated sanctions if someone's on probation or parole. So what a graduated sanction means is that if you've violated your conditions of parole with what we call a technical violation, which would be a non-criminal offense below or above a class A misdemeanor or above. So class B misdemeanor would fall under a graduated or a technical violation. So also a lot of it is maybe a dirty drug test or failure to hit curfew or forget to meet with your probation officer. These are called technical violations. And in Tennessee, that is what we see a lot happening is these folks are having their probation revoked and they are being put in prison for these technical violations. And it's really adding to the prison population. And at one point, 50% of new admissions were technical violations of probation and parole. So what this will allow either the probation officer or the court to say, okay, if you have a technical violation, we're not going to just revoke your probation and put you in prison. What we're going to do is we're going to implement some of these other sanctions, such as maybe additional drug testing, maybe if it's severe enough, a 15-day shock incarceration. But what we're not going to do is revoke and then put these people right back into the prison system. We're going to try to address this with a little bit more precision rather than, be too big of a hammer, and so because we see that happening and we also see it not being very effective. So that is very key to what the governor's wanting to do in the alternative sentencing. It's like a 90-page bill, so it does a lot of things, but I'll hit the highlights. The Reentry Success Act is also a really, really important piece of legislation that passed the House today, again, with only one no vote. And what that will do, I think, is in addition to really investing in reentry programming and investing in more quality supervision and ensuring that more people who should be paroled are paroled, it's really going to do something, really has a very specific public safety purpose, which is mandatory supervision. Tennessee is one of the first states I've ever worked in that didn't have some form of mandatory supervision. And what we've been seeing is that fewer and fewer people are being paroled. So they're serving the entirety of their sentence, the complete sentence. So once they have done so, they walk out the prison door and the Department of Corrections has no jurisdiction over them whatsoever. That can be really dangerous, and dangerous for the individual leaving too, because you can have someone in prison for 20 years. The world has changed while they were in prison, and you're going to expect them to be successful when they leave and without having any help or assistance. So these folks will be, more folks will be, well, everyone, unless you don't qualify for parole, will be paroled 1 year before the expiration of their sentence. So the Department of Corrections can provide transitional assistance in the reentry process. I think that's really key to public safety. And then it's also going to do a lot of removing employment barriers and so on and so forth, which I think will be super helpful as well.
Thanks for the overview. Justin, let me ask you, and then we'll go to Tori and also Gail as well. If I'm not mistaken, or I may have read, wasn't there a bill at one point, I'm talking about probation now, let's say men getting out or women, for the potential for 10 days of good days out of a month, I thought, whereby you can shorten the amount of probation time that you might be on. If you've got an 8-year probation, it could be cut down to 6 or 5. Does any of that ring with you? Some sort of incentive to behave yourself when you're on parole?
Yeah, but in both in prison and out of prison. And part of what the governor's bills also do is provide corrections officers and wardens with those incentives, and then probation officers with the opportunity to incentivize good behavior, because you want people to be ready to come out and to reintegrate into society. And that might involve being on your good behavior, looking for a job, getting a certification to do a job. So the ability to get an education while you're in prison or as you're coming out of prison, or to pass those drug tests. All of those are important incentives that we want to be able to provide to our corrections community so that they can help people transition back into public life, into a life outside of prison, and be ready for that, to get a job and to become a tax-paying productive citizen. So those are really important steps that we've needed to take for a long time to expand those opportunities so that we have, I think as Julie said, it's sort of a better landing for these individuals, rather than just flip on the switch, turn them out onto the street and expect that they're going to be able to go get a job and reintegrate into their communities, find housing, and all of those things that are very difficult to do for somebody who's been in prison for several years.
I mentor a man who has been out now for a little less than a year. He called to his probation officer, Tori, and I'm no longer doing that. What? He didn't even know that they had changed probation officers, and he feels as if there is no care for him. Nobody cares. He's gotten out. Hey, good luck. Help yourself out. You get some of that with your organization. You try to fight that, don't you?
So that's one of the things that we think is a great deal in this Reentry Success Act is it really finds those community partners like Men of Valor, like some of these other organizations, so that they're actually partnered up with someone that can be a mentor and a caseworker. And it's not just the supervisory check-in. You actually have someone that's looking out for their well-being, making sure that they are able to find work, helping them break down those barriers that are often in place as people are trying to reenter. So we think that's really a core component to, helping people find that path back to prosperity.
And you want driver's licenses. That's a part of this as well. That puts a smile. That's been a real passion of yours the last couple of years.
Yeah, it was a common sense bill that we ran in 2019 because we realized that people get stuck in this cycle of poverty. That if, they get their driver's license suspended because they didn't pay their fines and fees, then they can't drive to and from work or school or to the grocery store, church, or anything else. If they have their driver's license suspended, and oftentimes people would continue going back to jail for driving on a suspended license. And we thought, well, there's got to be a common sense solution here, right? So we did a lot of work on it and made it so that people could pay as little as I think $65 and get a restricted license back in 2019. And they would be, and it would only be good for going to work or school. So you couldn't, take that out and go out on a Friday night or anything, right? But it would be for necessary items. And we thought that was a really good step in the first direction, helping people to set up a payment plan to get back on their feet and to be able to drive to and from work and school. And so as part of the Reentry Success Act, the governor actually gets rid of the reinstatement fee that you would have to pay if your license was suspended for non-payment of fines and fees. And that's a huge step in the right direction, removing the amount that someone had to make on a payment plan. At one point, I think it was as high as $125 a month. And for someone that's not working, that's a lot of money to come up with as a minimum to try and get a restricted license. So now it can be much lower and much more in line with people's income and where they're at and what they're trying to do. It recognizes that people need a path back to their former selves or their better selves, I guess.
I think I've even had some of the guys tell me, I wish we would have even a bus pass that we could use for about 3 months or something because, I can't afford a car, the driver's license thing in that regard. So just there are avenues that I think we can try to help them out in that respect. Gail, if I'm not mistaken, you're on record for saying the current bail system is, quote, broken, that it's unfair. Explain that to me, please.
Hey, Rudy, thanks for bringing this to the topic table for discussion. And this is something that I got educated on in the last 2 years. And what I found is there's only 2 countries in the whole world that still use a cash bail system, United States and the Philippines. And then in the United States, there's already 11 states that have abolished it. But Tennessee had a law passed in 1978 to help make it more fair. Now, how is it unfair? Let me tell you what it does. If you're accused of a crime and you don't have the money to post bail, you have not been to trial, you have not been found guilty, just because you are low income, you have to remain in jail. Or you could plead guilty and get out, but neither one of those are sound alternatives. So that's how it's unfair. And guess who is disproportionately oppressed by that kind of a system? The community of Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. So we've unfairly targeted people that are just, only thing they're guilty of is low income. Where the wealthy and some of the most heinous criminals, like the drug kingpins, they have plenty of money to post bail and get out. But some people with misdemeanor charges or low level felonies that don't really hurt a person, these are things that they're going to jail for, and they're not able to get out. The other thing is expensive. Think about what it's doing to our economy. Some of these individuals lose their jobs. They can't pay their rent. They can't continue child support. And so here we are, we've got a double whammy on the system. You've got dads and moms that are being removed from the household. And we all know that the statistics show that most criminals come from a traumatic childhood, Well, there's nothing more traumatic than putting a mom and dad in jail, especially unjustly like this is. And it's just downright inefficient. You know, Rudy, when I look at what's happening, how many times have we seen it in the news that jails are overcrowded, that we're facing lawsuits in the state of Tennessee because of the overcrowding and the unhealthy situation. And now we're missing out on federal funds. The federal government will actually pay counties to do a pre-trial release program. Davidson County's enjoyed that. We actually have 4 communities in Tennessee that are doing it the right way and following the law of 1978. So what we need to do is get 185 of our judges to start adhering to the law and doing it consistently across our state. And let's help these people that their only thing they're guilty of is low income.
Let me throw this out to all of you. Jamie, or Julie, I mean, first, if you don't mind, again, a man that I know who's gotten out, he spent, I think, 3.5 years, had children, couldn't pay child support in that period of time. Now he's gotten out, he's barely scratching, trying to get a job. I sympathize with the wife and the children, but the court says, now you're going to have to pay up all that child support that you lost for the 4 years that you were out. And he is strapped on this end. Is there anything that can be done to help both sides in that regards? Because he says, he's almost in tears saying, I know I want to do it and need to do it, but I don't have the job to be able to do it. And I'm going to be paying for 10 years to make up for the 3 years that I was in. And yet I feel for the wives and the children. Anything we can do there?
Well, I mean, obviously we never want to minimize the importance of paying child support. But I think one of the things that we can do is to not criminalize the failure to pay child support if one is making a good faith attempt to do it. Because one of the things you do see happen is these folks will be violating a condition of their release, and they end up in prison where they're not making any money, where they're definitely not going to be paying any child support. So one of the things that we can be doing from a policy standpoint is making sure we're not creating an additional obstruction to that individual's ability to pay.
Any other thoughts from somebody? I see Justin, I see you right nodding your head. Tori as well.
Yeah, I mean, the big challenge with a lot of this is even after someone has served their time, we shackle them with debt, we shackle them with fines and fees, the inability to not only get a driver's license, to get a license to do a job, for example. And so we need to eliminate those barriers if we're going to expect people to be able to return to society, get a job, and become productive citizens. And so I think there needs to be an ongoing discussion about those fines and fees and the impact they have, because in reality, and Tori knows this from her work on the driver's license side of things, these county clerks will fight you and try to prevent you from passing this legislation because they want some ability to punish someone so that they can collect their fines and fees, but they're not collecting them anyway. So if they're not getting that revenue as it stands, because if that person doesn't have a job, they're not going to be paying them. And so it's illogical to leave something on the books as a threat to be able to collect fines and fees that they can't collect in the first place, when the ripple effect that has on that person's life and their family is extensive.
Tori, I understand that. I hear that. But then there's that part of me that says, people would say, wait a minute, there's the victim. They deserve it. They did the crime. Let them suffer for what they're doing. Then I've had other people who have been in say to me, wait a minute, I can't even get health insurance. Can I get 6 months worth of health insurance just to get me on my feet? How do you balance those two worlds between the victims and the people that are getting out, trying to get back in society, making them feel good about it?
Well, one of the things that we actually just had a victory on, because we think part of an effective justice system also restores victims. And, you know, we found out through our work and some voting rights issues that oftentimes when victims restitution is ordered, the actual victim who, you know, either had the crime perpetrated against them or was out of at a financial loss because of a theft or a vandalism, and they have court ordered restitution, a lot of the same clerks and the court system, they would collect, as the defendant got out and started paying their money back, they would collect all the government court costs, fines, and fees first. And the victim actually was at the end of the line, and they would rarely, if ever, even get their restitution, which was just so appalling and wrong. And so we've we've got two bills this year. Well, one bill really, Senate and House versions, right? And so we just passed it in Senate Judiciary, and it'll be on the floor next week. And I fully expect we'll pass it with strong bipartisan support. It's just one of those things that, you do have to balance out, restoring victims as part of an effective justice system. So that is a piece of it, but we also need to remove those barriers for people that are, have shown that they have earned their second chance, and they should be able to get a job, and they should be able to get housing, and they should be able to really fully rejoin society. And so that's finding that balance is a tough piece, but it started for us with doing the victims restitution reform. I think that goes a long way. And then breaking down the barriers for individuals as they reenter so that they can find employment. That's a huge step in the right direction.
Let me ask all of you about shortening sentences in order to save money. How to decide whether to bring. I've even seen a conversation about first-degree murder from 51 years down to 25 years, depending on what their behavior is like. Gail, give me some thought on shortening sentences where people say, holy smokes, how are we going to be able to do this? These guys deserve to be in there, but we're trying to, at the same time, save money. How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, we've got situations where there's misdemeanors and low-level felonies that are non-person offenses. I hear this all the time that, well, we can't let these people out of jail. Well, there's a lot of countries and states that do not, even in the first step, put these people in jail for these kind of offenses. This might be anything from a homeless person picked up for public drunkenness to like a George Floyd. Let's talk about the most recent case. He passed a counterfeit bill that could have easily been handled, and that whole scenario would not have been unfolded like it did, where you just issue a summons, like a ticket, and they appear in court, or they plead guilty and they just pay a fine. It's just like when you get a speeding ticket. Everybody that speeds doesn't go into jail. So what you do is you just relook at the offenses that are being committed in a community. And if it's not a threat to that community and they're not at a flight risk, then you don't put them in jail in the first place. And then you really reduce the recidivism, because they've proven that 40% of the people that go to jail will commit another crime.
Rudy, to your question specifically, we've done some work in this area. We've been pretty engaged in a lot of the justice reform area. So, I heard Senator Bowling presenting this bill in particular. And this was as a result of the Biden 1990s crime bill, where we had life without the possibility of parole. And so they are wanting to basically bring back this lesser charge and have a second look at some folks that maybe it wasn't a capital murder case, that maybe they did deserve 25 years, but not 50 years, not 80 years. So it's still going to leave the judicial discretion there. I think that's something to take a second look at. But even with, for instance, we did a drug-free zone reform. There was a bill that we passed last year. It saved $18 million, okay? 18 million taxpayer dollars by passing this bill last year. And it basically said that, if you had a small amount of drugs, people got caught up in this sentencing, especially with mandatory minimums, were getting caught up in mandatory minimum sentencing. And so the same person who maybe is struggling with a drug addiction, who is not selling drugs to children, they could even have been in their own apartment, but they could be charged with this enhancement charge, which would have required them to be in jail at least 12 years. So we passed this, and we reduced that drug-free zone from 1,000 feet back down to 500 feet. And so that the enhancement only applies if they're actually interacting with children or are trying to sell drugs in a school zone, for instance, instead of doing drugs in their own apartment, which is still not great, but not the same thing as drug dealing to children. I'm sure we can all agree. But there are 500 people in jail still under this mandatory minimum, that they received that enhanced sentence. And, there was a bill this year for them to take a second look at those folks now that the law has changed and say, do they still need to be in jail? They're serving longer offenses than people that have committed violent crimes. That's how strong these mandatory minimums are. So there was a bill just to have a second look at it. Unfortunately, it did not get through the Judiciary Committee, but we're hoping to see it come back next year.
Justin, did you have a thought? I thought you might have raised.
Yeah, and I think a big thing to point out is that bill alone, fixing the issue and making sure that we went back to the original intent of that type of crime, saved several $1 million a year. And when you're talking about it costing $30,000 a year to house a single inmate, it doesn't take just letting everyone out in order to save a lot of money. Small reforms just like that can save tens of millions of dollars. What the governor has proposed this year will ultimately save hundreds of millions of dollars potentially long term. And when we're talking about this being now the third or fourth largest category of spending in our state budget, we spend a lot of money on corrections for very little results. When half the people come out in prison are back within 3 years, we're not getting the bang for our buck. And so there are plenty of things we can do that don't involve what some other states have done of just completely letting people out of prison because they're overcrowded, but being strategic and thoughtful about the approach can still save millions and millions of dollars for taxpayers.
Yeah, and can I just piggyback on what Justin's saying? Because I think that's a really important point, because, I hear a lot of the critics of particularly what the governor is wanting to do, and I heard this on the floor today, is that, oh, you're just trying to save money, and that is not actually true. I mean, obviously saving money is a collateral benefit because we should only be spending taxpayer money on programs that actually provide the taxpayer return for that expenditure. But I mean, the whole point is trying to create a criminal justice system that operates efficiently and effectively. And we're spending a lot of money in Tennessee to incarcerate more people than most other states are doing, where I think our incarceration rate is 10% higher than the national average, but our violent crime rate is also significantly higher. So we're not getting the return that in terms of public safety for all this money that we are spending, because the response, the sanction is not commensurate with what it takes to correct the behavior. We're out kicking our coverage, if you will. And it's actually, not only is it not providing public safety benefits, it's actually hurting public safety. And I think the perfect example of this is, again, the mandatory supervision, where a lot of people their opposition is saying, well, it's just early release. It's not early release. It's mandatory supervision. So we're releasing people into the hands of the Department of Corrections to supervise their transition, rather than just throwing them out on the street just for the sake of wringing out that one last year of their sentence. That does not serve public safety. And so it's not just about saving money. It's about making sure we're investing in a criminal justice system that actually provides the returns for the taxpayer in terms of public safety. And if we're not doing that, then we're wasting money.
For those of you listening and watching, we want to thank you. This is Straight Talk Thursday. Let me ask this question about, can we get a uniformity of sentencing? I don't even know if it's possible, because again, I talk to guys in prison and they tell me, man, if you're caught in this Sumner County or someplace, he's going to put you in jail for 10 years for pot, and in another county, it'll be 2 years. It's just, there's nothing uniform. Is there anything that can be done, or is it such an individual, depending what the guy's attitude is like or what it's like? Can anything be done? Because that really bugs the guys when they read on the outside, hey, you can buy pot in Denver, but I've been in here for 10 years. What can we do about that?
Right. Well, I mean, I know that there's one of the things that the governor really wants to do is take a second look or a closer look at our sentencing code and see how we can create some, I don't know if I want to call it uniformity, but maybe a little bit more structure. But I think it's also very important that throughout the process, we recognize there is a real strong need for prosecutorial discretion and judicial discretion. I would never really want to remove those two factors when talking about how someone arrives at the sentence that they got. We have locally elected DAs, we have locally elected judges, assuming they reflect the will of the voters who put them there. Yeah, it can be a little bit frustrating when you see, someone in Williamson County being prosecuted for possession, and then you see in Davidson County, the prosecutors just really deciding they're just really not going to be prosecuting that crime. That can be frustrating. I think that we should not have prosecutors just determining what laws to enforce and what laws they are not going to enforce. The legislature passes laws and it's their obligation to enforce them, and the same with the judges. But I think that if you get too stringent, you'll start creating mandatory minimums, which is what we don't want to do, which is like, okay, you commit this crime, you have to serve this sentence. That takes the judge's ability to look at this person and be like, well, what about all these mitigating factors that might exist? So tying the judge's hand and even the prosecutor's hand to a certain degree, I think can also have that reverse blowback in the sense that you could maybe start seeing more people serving longer periods of time because they can't go back and really say, okay, all right, well, there are a lot of other factors here that I want to consider when determining whether or not to give that person the sentence that they end up getting.
One thing that we've really found as we started working on justice reform, it's like peeling an onion, right? The more you dig in, the more layers you find, the more stinky it is, the more you see what needs to be fixed within this current system. Our criminal code in Tennessee is due a rewrite. A lot of the laws have been on the books for decades. You've got a number of legislatures in the past that made things a higher level of a felony or a higher level of a misdemeanor that shouldn't have been. So we are due for a recode and really looking in depth at all the different things that people can be charged with. Should it be a misdemeanor? Should it be a felony? There's a huge number of felonies on the books in Tennessee that should not be felonies. And frankly, they're only on the books as a felony so they can be charged as a felony, knowing good and well that those charges will be reduced to a misdemeanor as the person works through the process. So there's a bunch to be done on that front. I agree with Julie completely on the judicial discretion and making sure there's discretion and avoiding mandatory minimums. But we've really got to do a lot to look at do these specific charges need to be felonies or misdemeanors? Do they need to have as severe of a penalty as is currently enshrined within our state code?
Gail, can we apply that to bail setting as well? Is it arbitrary? Is it, just depends?
Yeah, it is. And like Julie said, we don't want to take away the independence of the judges. That's part of the thing that we entrust them with as we vote them into their seats and responsibilities. But we do need some standards and some consistencies across the state, not just in sentencing, but in how they apply bail. And hopefully, the thing therein is the problem. You've got 185 judges that they do not report to anybody. They have no manager. The only accountability is the voter. And if we're honest, when we go to the polls to vote, how many times do we really know what these judges, how they performed in their position? And that would be something that we would need to maybe address somehow, that there can be a more transparency of what these judges, which ones are following the laws and which ones are just kind of doing the status quo. That's the way we've always done it, kind of thing, which those days are gone. I agree with Tori that we need to, the time is right. The groundswell is starting. People want criminal justice reform and they want it to be fair. They want it to be equal across all classes of people and citizens. And we've got to hold our judges to that because they're the ones that make those ultimate decisions. And on the bail, we could even do something like, you don't have to eliminate it altogether, but you do want to tell the judges that that is the last resort, that most of these people need to be set free after they've been accused, unless they're a tremendous threat to the community or unless they're a flight risk. But even with that, we have technology today to prevent those two things. And we've already seen in other countries and states that when they eliminate cash bail, 95% of the accused show up for court. So we're taking a lot of money to keep people close by that really don't need that supervision in a jail. They can do it, go home to their families, go home to their jobs, pay their rent, pay their child support, and then have reminders for them, saying your court date's coming up, let's get back in court. But, we need to get Tennessee in the same century that the rest of the world is in on cash bail.
Tori, can we practically chip away at this iceberg? I mean, where do we start?
So there's actually going to be a summer study this coming year. There were a number of bills that would have looked at the pretrial bail reform this year, and they all got moved to the summer study committee. But I believe that there will actually be a group of us that will meet together to try and figure out what we can do and how that's going to best work. There were a lot of good ideas that were put out there on the table also. So I think that there's something that we can do even on the pretrial side, because we know, half the people that are in Tennessee's jails are not convicted of a crime. And so, obviously, like Gail said, the people that are a threat to the community, those are the ones, who should stay incarcerated. And the people that are not, that, if it was a misdemeanor, we want to give more discretion to the judges, especially for releasing people on their own recognizance. And we've done some of that thus far, and we've clarified what they can and can't do, especially with, nonviolent misdemeanors, that they can just write a citation. They don't have to take people to jail right now. So we've made a lot of progress, but there is still so much work to be done.
Justin, on one of our previous shows a couple of weeks ago, we talked about initiatives for prisoners. It seems to me that if we can work on the mindset and the character of the prisoner in prison while he or she is there, you've got a better chance when they get out that they will want to be law-abiding, that they have incentive to do better, that people watching them on parole will give them brownie points for being good people. Do we spend enough time with those things? Are there things, is that part of the reform, is what we do with them in prison?
It absolutely is. It's where it has to start. And if you don't start there, it's fanciful to think that you can have someone in a jail cell not making any decisions, being told when to eat, being told when to leave, go outside, work out, and come back every single day, that all of a sudden when they walk outside those doors, they know how to go get a job, they know how to go find housing and do all of those things that we take for granted because we live in this society every day. When you're shut off for that for so long, you lose it. And so if you're able to start getting an education when you're in prison and figuring out what you want to do with your career when you get out and going ahead and getting credits towards that, whether it's education or certification, you're going to be much better off. In Germany, for example, they have actually started to look at allowing prisoners to maintain some autonomy in their decision making. They decide what meals they eat. They cook their own meals. And they cook in groups because it allows them to make decisions so that when they do come out, they're already accustomed to that, versus turning off the light switch and telling them you can't make any decisions at all while you're in prison. And then when you come out, you've got to make all the decisions for yourself. It doesn't work that way. And so there are things that we need to do to lower those hurdles. The governor's original legislation a couple of years ago in his first year really took a good first step at providing education in a number of our prisons across the state. Some of that is continued in the reforms that we've talked about today, but just to making it easier to get a license to do a job. There are guys who have actually been in prison learning to be a barber, taking classes to be a barber, and then they come out and they're denied a license because they have a criminal record. So we passed a law a few years ago called the Fresh Start Act that says you can't deny someone a license to do a job unless it's directly related to the crime they committed. So you want to be a locksmith and you've got a string of breaking and entering felonies on your record, well, you can be denied that license. You want to be a barber and you've got a drug crime in your past, you can't be denied that license. So you have the opportunity to do more jobs and to start in prison to prepare for those jobs and getting those certifications and licenses so that it's an easier trajectory when they get out.
Julie, how are we doing as a state compared to other states? Are there things going on elsewhere that we should be envious of or we should be really aware of?
Well, as far as the first state, especially the first conservative state to really take criminal justice reform on and then do it so well that everybody it became sort of an evangelical movement, is Texas in 2007. They passed some pretty comprehensive reforms that look a lot like, on maybe a bigger scale, but look a lot like what the governor's trying to do here in Tennessee, and they've closed 10 prisons. In addition to just closing prisons, and I think they've saved almost $4 billion, the crime rate in Texas has gone down to 1960s level as a result. So it proves that you can actually incarcerate less people if you're doing it in a smart way and actually improve public safety as a result. That's why we call it smart on crime, because you can be tough on crime, but then still have a really high crime rate and have made no impact whatsoever. That was one of the reasons why the governor had the roundtable that he had a couple of weeks ago with former governor of Texas, Perry, who was the one who actually championed and signed these into law. My Right on Crime's parent company is the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we worked with the governor and really helped, create architecture around what conservative reform should look like, and other states have since taken notice. I think Tennessee's on the right track. What can we do better? And I'm going to just piggyback on what Gail is saying. We have a pretrial system that does not turn on risk. And that's a big, big problem. It's a big safety problem. It's a big fairness problem, but it's also a big safety problem. If you can pay, you can get released. And that's a big problem for public safety. And in addition to fairness, because I think, Gail could probably speak to this a little bit more. So, when you incarcerate someone, you hold someone pretrial, if they're nonviolent, there's no risk attached to this individual's being released. They lose their job. All these collateral consequences happen to that individual. The likelihood that they're going to end up pleading to something is much higher. But then on the flip side, you have folks who should be held pretrial who are getting released. Perfect example, 2 weeks ago, a man shot and killed his wife and his mother-in-law. He was out on bail after having tried to strangle her. And this happened just in Texas. I think over the weekend, an individual killed was out on bail for an offense of sexual assault against a child. He was out on bail, kills his wife and 2 kids. Well, I don't know if the 2 kids were his, but 2 children who were with his wife. And when Men of Valor had the Thursday live stream around victims' rights and domestic violence, I actually sent a message to the cop who handles a lot of the domestic violence docket for Metro, and I asked, how long does it usually take for them to get, for these domestic violence folks who are being arrested for a domestic violence charge, to be released? And she's like, almost immediately, almost always. So you have an individual who has injured his significant other or her significant other. Those are the folks who are at the highest risk of then going and immediately reoffending and by hurting that same individual. And these are the people we're releasing because we just set a bond, they can pay it, and they're out. And that is, and we see it happen time and time again, particularly with domestic violence, where that person's out in 12 hours and that woman's dead. And bail just does not help that situation at all. So I think we really need to recalibrate how we're releasing people pretrial, and it should be focused on risk. And one of the things that I love that the governor's doing, and I've been a champion of this for a really long time, is to create a statewide pretrial risk assessment. Davidson County has it, Knox County has it, I think Hamilton County has it, and a couple others have it. It's going to create it statewide, which is just an algorithm at booking that informs the judge's decision as to whether or not this person is low risk or high risk. If this person is a high risk person, that judge can then have something to base this decision to say, hey, look, maybe I just really want to hold this person pretrial. If this person's assessed low risk, which means he's a low risk of reoffending or absconding, then unless there's some other thing that the judge will have to create to overcome the presumption, let that person go. And I think that we need to have a system that focuses on risk. And if we don't, then we're going to continue paying financially, fiscally, but then from the standpoint of public safety, we're going to continue absorbing the consequences of releasing these people.
Tori, I think about the mind and the mindset of people. There every day shootings, mass shootings, the mentality of society. With all that going on, are you optimistic, or are you, or do we need to? Whoa, wait a minute! All this reform stuff, let them out earlier and stuff, but society seems to be going the other way. How do you balance those two worlds?
I think that a lot of people are just spiritually blind right now. And that's why the work that Men of Valor is doing is so, so important, because you all are meeting them where they're at, right? You're visiting, you're forming those relationships while folks are still incarcerated, and you're providing that mentorship and that helping hand to help them fully readjust and re-enter society, to be able to find a job and to find housing. And that is exactly what our community partners should be called to do. That's how we balance it, because there is spiritual blindness in this world right now. But this is one thing that, and this is Tori as the believer, not Tori as the state director of AFP, but this is something that as Christ followers, we should be doing. We should all be called to do to help our fellow man.
Justin, I don't know, your thoughts in that regards. I just, we try to, you're right, Tori, we go into prisons all the time, and they didn't have any visitors for a year because of COVID. They didn't have us for a year. I tried to stay in phone contact with them. There's an incredible amount of depression from them and the things that they talk about. And the biggest thing for them is they want some sense of dignity. So we're trying to find some way, I think, through all of the work of all of you, is to give them a sense of dignity so they want to be better people, right?
Well, and they are people, right? They're people too. And so, and yes, there are heinous people who do very terrible things, and those people are going to stay in prison for the rest of their lives. But the reality is 95% of them are coming out. And so if we don't give them dignity while they're there, then they're not going to have a lot of dignity when they come out, and we're going to suffer the consequences of that. And so I think treating them like people, believing in the power of redemption, those are very powerful things that we should always keep in mind when dealing with those who have made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some of those mistakes in people's lives rise to the level of crimes, and they should be punished for that, and they should serve their time and pay their dues and pay their restitution to victims and those types of things. But the reality is most people are going to do that and then come back into society. How can we make that easier for them so that they don't turn back to a life of crime and make our communities less safe? And so treating them as humans when they're in the system is going to make it a lot easier for them to live like productive tax-paying humans when they get out.
Let me try to pass that around to all of you. Gail, are you optimistic? Do you feel we're trying to go in the right direction? Are we making progress?
Oh yeah, I think like what Tori said, we have so many layers that we can work on right now. And there's some real easy, obvious, low cost solutions that we can implement. And they will have a great return on that if we will just be brave enough to look through very clear lenses and get voices from all segments of society to come together and say, this isn't working. And we know that. We know what's not working. We really do. It's just we've got to be brave enough to face it and then say, we're not going to be status quo anymore. Just because this is the way we've always done it, we're going to have to make changes. And change doesn't come easy or fast, but we've got to take those little steps. We may have to push them a mile to get it to moving in, but
Julie,
we're not going to stop pushing.
Julie, I would think anything that benefits the taxpayer will get a whole lot more support than philosophical ideas. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think when you're talking about spending the taxpayers' money, the interest of the taxpayer should be a priority rather than a political or philosophical agenda. When we're talking about, I mean, corrections, criminal justice is an essential government function, and it needs to function in the best interest of the people paying for it, not in the best interest of someone's idea or someone's political agenda. I think it has to serve their interest because they're the ones paying for it. That in and of itself is a philosophy. I mean, as a conservative, that's my philosophy. I mean, I feel like the criminal justice system is a government program that I, as a Tennessean, pay for. It should serve my interest in terms of public safety. I don't necessarily believe that the right approach is to impose a philosophical idea on the idea of keeping people safe. You need to just do what you got to do to keep people safe. And I think that I think the idea of tough on crime is in a way a philosophical agenda item that has been imposed on the taxpayer, because it's this idea of I need to feel like I went after this person. I need to feel like I just really hammered that person. But at the end of the day, if what you did not actually result in a positive public safety outcome, because you put that person in prison for a long period of time for a non-violent crime, they come out a violent criminal because they've been hanging around violent criminals for 15 years, then yeah, you may have really hammered that person, but you actually really did the public a disservice. In that sense, I think a lot of people indulging this tough on crime idea have adopted a philosophy that hasn't actually served public interest. And so I think we need to go back and really have a come to Jesus about how we're, are we doing this because we need to feel tough, or are we actually being tough on crime by actually curbing criminal behavior?
One more thing I want to add to that, especially with the Alternatives to Incarceration and the Reentry Success Act that just passed the House. Now it still has to pass the Senate. But, we know from all the research that every dollar we invest on the front end, whether that's through job skills training or reducing those barriers or keeping people out of the system that maybe they need a drug addiction program instead of just getting thrown in jail, that's what's actually going to solve their problem. So we know for every dollar we invest on that front end like that, or we invest to help people fully reenter and rejoin their communities, that saves us $5 on the back end and reduced incarceration costs from people not continually going down that cycle. And Rudy, I'm trying to remember the stat, but I know Tennessee, we have a terrible recidivism rate overall. Can you tell me what the Men of Valor recidivism rate is? Like, don't you guys have like some amazing proof?
I don't quote me on it, but I have read that down to 15-20% as compared to the state and stuff, because we get some guys that come over there and then leave and have problems and go back. But overall, the ones that stick it out, I believe, and I may be accurate to that, it might like be 15 or 20%, maybe even staying at 15. That's remarkable. But again, we talked about it before. I will tell you, we are faith-based. And somehow that is the first practice of the first conversation with these men, is to try to change the heart of the man so that he wants to be a different. And it's the same on the women's side, but we're men of valor. If you change their heart, then they want to do some of these things that we're all talking about here today. And I think that's, to me, the first step. And you talked about it, Justin. Let's start in the prison with what we can do with these men and give them hope, right?
Absolutely. And the governor's got a mentorship program where you can actually do that. And Men of Valor does mentoring in the prison. So you can actually volunteer for these organizations that are doing such great work. There's a This Is Living Ministries up in the Cookeville area that Lindsay Holloway, who's a good friend of ours at Beacon, is doing amazing work. So there are great organizations across our state where you really can engage firsthand and give those individuals the dignity they deserve. And as a result, you could literally be helping save tens of thousands of dollars a year when they don't turn back to a life of crime. And the most important thing to remember, when they're not going back into prison, that means they haven't created another victim. We have made our community safer by working together and saving taxpayer money in the process. So it's a win-win situation.
Gail, I know the bail issue is really important to you. People who have a crime has been committed to would quickly say to you, I don't want him out. Don't give him any bail. Here's what he did to me. He'll come back and do it to me again. That's a hurdle, isn't it?
It is, and that's a valid point that I hear from critics. And I think there's still a common ground that those people can be satisfied, because we're not saying really nobody gets to go to jail. We're just saying, let's relook at how that is determined. Make sure it's not just based on, do they have the financial means to keep out of jail in the first place before they've even been proven guilty. We're talking about people that are just accused. They have not gone to trial. They have not been convicted. We're just saying, keep the people out that are not a threat to society, such as domestic abusers or a flight risk. And, you know, we can see a great difference in jail overcrowding will be reduced. We'll be able to have children less impacted by situations where mom and dad might have been in jail. Let's keep them in the home. Let's keep them in the job place. And one thing I will mention too about this, you know, the bail industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's our biggest opponent to this. It's not really the victims or the police, it's the bail industry. And it's unregulated. If nothing else, the state of Tennessee needs to regulate the bail industry because they charge exorbitant interest rates. And even after somebody is proven innocent in court, they still have to pay back the bail money. So, you know, this is just not right, the way that it's being administered. And if I'd like to see that money go directly into the courts, not to the bail bondsman. You know, the courts could use that then to help pay child support for those kids that are still needing to have financial means provided to them.
Let me clarify this. I've gotten the word that for those men who finish the year-long program at Men of Valor, the recidivism rate is under 10%. Under 10% for those who finish the year, and a lot of them do. We've got just a couple of minutes left. Let me give each of you a few seconds and go around to see how you, if you're optimistic, by what happened today from the governor and how you feel about the situation. And we talked about optimism. Julie, if you don't mind.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, am I optimistic? Yes, I am. I am extremely optimistic. And I'm not typically, I'm kind of a skeptical type of person in real life, but I think that we have leadership in this state that are willing to be bold and buck this idea of what tough on crime should be, and say, look, you know, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of what you call me. If you call me soft on crime, or, you know, I hear the hug a thug thing floating around the legislature on occasion. I think that we have a lot of members of the legislature, and particularly a governor, who is willing to say, I'm going to do the right thing. And I know, and I have a pretty strong sense of what the right thing for my state is, and I'm going to go do it. And I think that as long as you have that North Star, you have a really good chance of going in the right direction. And so I feel like with the leadership that's been exhibited this session, and then just by our governor, I feel very optimistic. So yeah, I think, you know, this session is going to be one important step. Next session, we're going to take another important step, and we'll just keep peeling away that onion, as Tori so aptly put.
Gail, a thought from you? We've just got a few seconds, if you don't mind.
I just want to encourage the listeners that there are many ways to get plugged in, and this is the year to make a difference. We're coming out of a very difficult year, and I think we've all been able to just kind of sit back and realize that, you know, I don't need to waste another day not making the world a better place. And there's so many ways that we can reform criminal justice and get involved with these organizations, the Men of Valor, what Tori's involved in, and Justin and Julie. And I'm going to be reaching out to people to try to see what kind of push we can do for the cash bail bond system.
There you go. Justin, your thought.
I am optimistic. Today was a big day. The biggest reforms we've ever seen in the state, passing the House overwhelmingly in a state that is law and order. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunity for reform. And I don't think we really have a choice. I think that if we fail to act, we're going to continue to spend a lot of money, not only for poor results, but for a lot of crime. And so I am optimistic that people are starting to realize that and figure out ways to solve the problem.
Mm. And Tori, you keep after it. I know that smile on your face. So today was a good day for you too.
Absolutely, it was a good day. And, I would just encourage people to get involved with these different groups. If you're involved or you want to be more involved with criminal justice reform, you could text 46262 or text CJRTN to 46262. That's how you would get engaged with us. We are up there lobbying at the state legislature. We do grassroots events. We're active across the state. So that's one way that you can get involved. And this is just the start. This is the one of many steps. So I would say we've taken the first steps previously here in Tennessee, but we have a long way to go, and we really need everyone working together. We've got a great dream team sitting here right in front of you today, and we would welcome more people to be at the table with us, pushing for common sense justice reforms that's going to benefit our entire state.
Tori, thank you so much. I've learned a great deal from all of you. I thank you. Justin, I thank you. Gail, thank you. And Julie, all of you for spending some time with us. And for those of you listening and watching, thank you again. Straight Talk Thursday. We sure enjoy bringing it to you and hope that you've learned a great deal from it. I know that I have. All of you, have a great day. So long, everyone.